Wow, 50 years. The origins of the Gustav Holst Museum lie firmly within my work during the early years of my appointment by Cheltenham Borough Council as their new art gallery and museum curator. I took up post in mid-1973 in readiness for local government reorganisation in 1974. One of my first tasks, I felt, was to provide a comprehensive report to the Borough Council on the range, content and state of the collections which were held for the people of Cheltenham. In so doing, I found hidden away a large quantity of material relating to the composer Gustav Holst. Exploring further, I found that the Holst family had left the collection to the borough after the composer's death in 1934. I also discovered that the Borough Council had placed a plaque to Gustav Holst on the house in which he was born, which had been unveiled by Ralph Vaughan Williams. I popped round immediately to see whether the plaque still existed and found that both plaque and house were in fact very much still in existence. The house was a modest, early Victorian terrace property on the edge of the garden town of Pitcherville. At that time, I had no idea that that very same house would, in a very short time, become an iconic part of Cheltenham Art Gallery and Museum. Returning to the Holst material deposited with us, I began to learn that there was some embarrassment in musical circles in Cheltenham that the original promise made by the Borough Council that the material would be on public display had never materialized. There was also some indication that the Holst family were also disappointed that the promise had not been kept. In fairness, a number of factors had prevented the realization of the original promise, notably the onset of the Second World War and its immediate aftermath. I then realized that 1974 was the centenary of the composer's birth. Perhaps we could stage something in 1974. My first move was to see if I could contact the Holst family, and so I approached his daughter Imogen. I was aware of Imogen being active in Suffolk at Albrook, as I had grown up in Suffolk, and my wife had been involved through the school in which she was teaching in Ipswich with Benjamin Britten, Peter Pears, and Imogen Holst in the staging of Neuer's Flood. So I wrote off to Imogen. Her response was immediate and highly enthusiastic, stating that she had given up all hope of Cheltenham doing anything about her father and the Holst material donated to Cheltenham. And so I started on plans to stage the Gustav Holst exhibition in 1974 at the Art Gallery and Museum, linking it with the 1974 Cheltenham Music Festival. The exhibition opened on the 6th of July 1974, with Imogen Holst being the opener, typically vivacious and positive. My colleague John Wood, the Cheltenham librarian and music enthusiast, also said a few words. During my words at the opening, I rashly announced that this time next year there would be a permanent exhibition of the Holst collection. Rashly, because I had no idea at all where that would be. If all else failed, I would vacate my office and turn that into a Holst room. In the various meetings and discussions with her, I had already become aware what a live wire Imogen was, an inspiration. And she was the star of the exhibition, lively and exciting, charming and inspiring all the assembled company. Whilst all the preparation to be going on for the exhibition, and quite separately, I'd also been busy with the Borough Surveyor, John Hancock, and my chairman, Terry Joyner, presenting the case for the acquisition of a period house to house material relating to Cheltenham and its history, from furniture to costume and other relevant material. Approval had been given by the council, strongly backed by the leader of the council, Charles Irvin, to go ahead when an appropriate building was found. In announcing at the exhibition that there would ere long be a Holst room, none of us expected that the house in which Gustav Holst was born would be offered as a result of the exhibition to the Borough Council. What happened was that friends of one of the museum staff lived in the Holst house, and at the exhibition mentioned that they had been seriously thinking of moving to smaller and more convenient premises as their health was not good. Their initial tentative approach was to state that they could not give the house to the Borough Council but would willingly sell direct to the council at an agreed and reasonable price, allowing them to purchase another property for themselves. I immediately, and it all in that same evening, took this up with my chairman. Here was a period house at a relatively modest price in an important historical area of Cheltenham, with a considerable added bonus of being the birthplace of one of Cheltenham's most famous sons. Approval for the purchase of a period house had already been passed by the council. We therefore pulled out all the stops to swing that approval to the purchase of this house, backed enthusiastically by the leader of the council, and not least by Imogen Holst. The proposal, with a report from the borough surveyor on the condition of the property and its market value, went to full council and was approved. Needless to say, Imogen was absolutely delighted. From that point on, she was a frequent visitor or as correspondent and activist on behalf of the project. The background support and activity of the Chief Executive Brian Wynne and Borough Treasurer Keith Nuckland was a significant factor in the realization and progress of the project. And so we, the museum team, set ourselves the task of getting the house sorted out in readiness to open in 1975. An ambitious project. I felt my first job was to provide an overall vision for this new museum, aided by Imogen Holst and my staff. In this latter respect, it was fortunate that we were in the middle of appointing additional members of staff, Mary Greensted for the applied arts and Stephen Blake for social history, and later Faye Little as education officer. Existing members of staff, including Alexandra Kelly, Christopher Randolph, and Alan Morrell, were an important part of this challenging project. My belief was that this museum should contain several strands. Firstly, Gustav himself, secondly, his music, and thirdly, his historical family context. But necessary and urgent matters relating to setting up the museum were pressing. Firstly, the building itself. Our borough surveyor, John Hancock, with enthusiasm, skills, and lateral thinking, was a crucial contributor to the realization of this vision. I well remember John's frequent visits to us with velving pockets and bags of such things as appropriate brass doorknobs and door and window furniture, and replicating the original railings to the frontage. Tackling the renovation and restoration of the building was our immediate concern. Cheltenham houses, particularly the smaller ones, are not noted for their solid and lasting construction, partly because they are often developed rapidly as speculative vectors, and partly because the local brick did not prove very durable. Much work was needed to be done on interior and external walls and on the roof. Later additions of things like doors and fireplaces had to be replaced. All this John Hancock masterminded. The interior of the house was, in addition, a matter which had to be very carefully considered. Good relations were established with external experts such as the V&A Museum and heritage and conservation specialists. It was decided to attempt to discover, for instance, what had been the wall coverings in the past, which meant revealing layer upon layer of wallpaper. As the rooms in the house were to be dedicated to different periods in its history, an appropriate paint, curtains, fittings, carpets, and floor coverings, fireplaces, and so forth had to be researched. It was no good applying furnishings which might be easily seen in contemporary paintings of larger houses being applied to this modest middle-class house. Research into such houses as this was difficult, but it was achieved with the expert help and advice of those external bodies already mentioned, plus such people as Sanderson's wallpapers and specialist paint firms. In addition, the external appearance needed to be researched, including the very small front garden. Whilst Mary and the other staff tackled the implementation of these practical matters, I had to be concerned with the administrative practicalities of getting the museum off the ground. Here I absolutely relied upon the expertise and enthusiasm of the Chief Executive Brian Wynne and the Borough Treasurer Keith Nuckland. In view of the much later difficulties of the Holst Museum, where a later Borough Council sought to sell the museum, It was a brilliant move to set up the museum as a trust, administered and staffed by the Borough Council, which meant that the Borough Council did not own the property. The trust did, and so the museum could not be closed. Another and very important strand was finance. Here, the Borough Treasurer was terrific. He was able to not only negotiate Borough Council finance, but also to liaise with external funding bodies. Without that considerable input, we would not have realized the project. From the start, it was appreciated that the museum could only be partly funded by council monies, but as a trust museum, we were able to seek outside funding and voluntary donations. So we had from the beginning to start an active program of fundraising. Here, Imogen was inspirational, calling upon her friends and contacts in the music world. The appeal, spearheaded by the then Mayor, Councillor Martin Jones, and Sir Arthur Bliss, Master of the Queen's Music, was launched with a concert in the Town Hall, fronted by myself and my chairman, Terry Joyner, with Imogen Holst giving some encouraging words. A message was read from Sir Arthur welcoming the creation of the museum and saying it was not only important for Cheltenham, but for British music as well, that such a museum should be created, saying, "Cheltenham must be warmly congratulated for their prompt and imaginative plan. This birthplace of Gustav Holst will surely become a meta for future students and lovers of music." The concert was given by the Linden Singers, arranged by Imogen and conducted by her and their regular conductor Ian Humphreys of works by Holst. Also attending and signing photos for a donation to the appeal was Richard Baker, at that time very much a high-profile figure in the BBC and its coverage of music. At that concert, it was announced that a trust fund had been set up with the Borough Council allocating £10,000, apart from the purchase of the house, and that our task is to raise a matching £10,000. The aim was to open the museum a year after the centenary exhibition, in other words, during 1975. Our intention was to keep the momentum of enthusiasm up and show financial contributors and the council that the vision was a reality. Inevitably, there were delays and hiccups, but we did open the museum in October of 1975. Not all areas were finished, but we felt it was no bad thing, as supporters and doubters could see that work really had gone on, and also the plans for the completion could be displayed and create hopefully further enthusiasm and hence support. We needed a publicity catching up, serious, not films, and in keeping with the ethos and philosophy of this museum. Royalty, with our strong Gloucestershire links, was invited to provide someone to do the official opening, and the Duke of Beaufort was delegated and proved an admirable choice. But of course, it was Imogen Holst who was the star attraction, and the local press, including the county magazines, were all anxious to have pictures and quotes from her. The Duke in his opening speech waxed eloquent, and his words were recorded in the local papers. This house should be a living part of the history of Cheltenham. I'm sure it will become a focus of interest in Cheltenham for the people of the town and the many people interested in the work of the composer throughout the world. A nice touch by the Duke was to turn to Imogen and say, "You share the same musical skills as your father," which was appropriate, because throughout the evening, Imogen often dashed to the piano, her father's piano, and played some joyous piece, encouraging visitors to sing along with her play, a characteristic and a talent which she displayed whenever she was in the museum subsequently, visitors finding themselves drawn into a sing-along with Imogen. Imogen's own speech, entirely off the cuff it appeared, included the following words: "This is something I've had in mind for more than 40 years, but I never dreamt it would actually happen. The council and museum staff in particular have done a wonderful job, and I'm delighted with the end result. It is quite magnificent."